My name is Alex, and this happened to me a couple of years ago when I was in college. I had just transferred to a new university and needed to find a place to live quickly. I found a cheap room to rent in a small apartment with another student named Jake. Jake seemed nice enough during our initial meeting. He was quiet and kept to himself, which I thought would be perfect for me to focus on my studies. When I first moved in, everything seemed normal. Jake was friendly but reserved, and we didn't interact much outside of exchanging pleasantries. I was busy with classes and adjusting to my new life, so I didn't think much about it. The apartment itself was a bit old, but it was cozy and felt like a good place to call home for the next few years. A few weeks after moving in, I started to notice strange things happening at night. It started with small noises, creaks, and whispers that I couldn't quite place. At first, I dismissed them as the sounds of an old apartment, but the noises became more frequent and harder to ignore. One night, I was lying in bed, struggling to fall asleep, when I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. They were soft, almost hesitant, but they were definitely there. I sat up in bed, straining to hear more, but the footsteps stopped. I got up and opened my door, but there was no one there. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination. However, the next night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder and more distinct. I listened intently, my heart racing, as they approached my door. I mustered up the courage to swing open the door, but once again, no one was there. I was starting to feel uneasy, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Over the next few days, the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. It felt like there were eyes on me whenever I was in my room, especially at night. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One night, I decided to stay up late to see if I could catch the source of the noises. I pretended to go to bed as usual, but I stayed awake, my eyes glued to the ceiling. Hours passed, and just when I was about to give up, I heard the familiar footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened to them approach my door. This time, I was determined to find out what was going on. I silently got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. With a deep breath, I flung it open and was met with the most chilling sight. Jake was standing in the hallway, staring at my door with a blank expression on his face. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood there, looking at me. I was frozen with fear, but I managed to stammer out, "Jake, what are you doing?" He blinked a few times, as if coming out of a trance, and mumbled something about hearing a noise and checking it out. He quickly retreated to his room, leaving me standing there, confused and terrified. The next morning, I decided to confront him about what had happened. I knocked on his door, and when he opened it, I asked him directly if he had been outside my room last night. He denied everything, saying he had been asleep and didn't know what I was talking about. His calm demeanor made me doubt my own memory, but I knew what I had seen. Jake's denial made me even more uneasy. I started to notice little things about him that I had previously ignored. He often stayed in his room with the door closed, and I rarely saw him leave the apartment. When he did, it was usually late at night or very early in the morning. I began to wonder what he did during those hours. Determined to get to the bottom of this, I decided to install a hidden camera in my room. I wanted to catch Jake in the act and prove that I wasn't losing my mind. I set up the camera in a discreet corner, aimed at my door, and waited for the night to come. That night, I went to bed as usual, pretending to fall asleep. Hours later, I heard the now familiar footsteps approaching my door. I stayed perfectly still, my heart pounding in my chest, and waited for the morning to check the footage. When I reviewed the recording the next day, what I saw made my blood run cold. The footage showed Jake standing outside my door for several minutes, just staring. He then slowly opened the door and walked into my room. He stood at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep for what felt like an eternity before quietly leaving and closing the door behind him. I was horrified. I immediately took the footage to the police and showed them what had been happening. They took my concerns seriously and came to the apartment to talk to Jake. When confronted with the evidence, Jake initially denied everything but eventually confessed. He claimed he had been sleepwalking and didn't remember any of it. Despite his explanation, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The police advised me to find a new place to live as soon as possible, and I didn't need to be told twice. I packed up my belongings and moved out that very day. During my last hours in the apartment, Jake tried to talk to me. He apologized profusely, saying he never meant to scare me and that he would seek help for his sleepwalking, but his words did little to comfort me. I couldn't forget the look in his eyes from the footage. It was like he was a different person. Leaving that apartment was a huge relief, but the experience left me scarred. I had trouble trusting people for a long time and would double-check every lock and window before going to bed. I even had trouble sleeping, fearing that someone might be watching me again. I moved into a new apartment with a couple of friends from my classes. They knew about my ordeal and were very supportive. For a while, I couldn't sleep without leaving a light on, and I installed a lock on my bedroom door. My friends understood and never made me feel paranoid or silly for taking those precautions. Over time, I managed to move past the incident, but it still haunts me to this day. Whenever I hear a strange noise at night or feel like someone is watching me, I'm transported back to those terrifying nights in that apartment. I've learned to be more cautious about who I choose to live with, and I always trust my instincts. I've done some research on sleepwalking since then, and while it can explain some strange behaviors, I still believe there was something more to Jake's actions. Maybe it was a side of him that he couldn't control, or maybe there was something darker at play. I'll never know for sure, but I'm grateful that I got out of that situation when I did. And that, my friends, is the story of the Midnight Stalker. Remember, not everyone is who they seem to be, and sometimes the scariest things are the ones right under our noses. My name is Sarah, and this happened to me about a year ago when I was starting my first job after college. I was excited about this new chapter in my life and needed to find a place to live quickly. After searching for a while, I found an affordable room in a shared house. The other tenant was an eccentric artist named Emma. During our initial meeting, Emma seemed quirky but friendly. She had a unique style and a passion for her art, which filled the house with colorful, if somewhat bizarre, decorations. I moved in with high hopes. The house itself was old but charming, with creaky floors and vintage furniture. Emma's art was everywhere: paintings on the walls, sculptures in the living room, and half-finished projects scattered throughout the house. I admired her creativity and thought living with an artist would be an interesting experience. The first few weeks were uneventful. Emma and I got along well enough, though she often retreated into her art studio, working late into the night. Occasionally, I would hear strange noises coming from her studio, muffled voices, the sound of heavy objects being moved, and sometimes even what sounded like chanting. I brushed it off as part of her artistic process and didn't think much of it. But soon, Emma's behavior began to change. She became increasingly erratic, muttering to herself and glaring at me whenever I tried to talk to her. She started leaving her strange, dark artwork all over the house, disturbing paintings of twisted faces and sculptures that looked like they belonged in a nightmare. The once colorful and quirky decorations turned into something sinister. One night, I came home to find the living room filled with bizarre sculptures made of what looked like bones and animal skulls. I asked Emma about them, and she simply smiled and said, "Art is about expressing the darkest parts of the soul." Her response sent chills down my spine, but I tried to laugh it off. As the days went by, the atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive. I started having nightmares and felt like I was constantly being watched. I noticed Emma's art becoming more disturbing and her behavior more unpredictable. She would lock herself in her studio for days, emerging only to stare at me with a look that sent shivers down my spine. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to explore the house a bit. I found myself standing in front of Emma's studio door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside. The studio was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The walls were covered in dark, chaotic paintings, and the floor was littered with strange objects. In the center of the room was a large table with what looked like an unfinished sculpture. As I got closer, I realized with horror that the sculpture was made of animal bones and human hair. My heart raced as I backed out of the room, my mind struggling to comprehend what I had just seen. I bumped into a shelf, knocking over a stack of papers. As I picked them up, I noticed they were covered in strange symbols and drawings of dark rituals. Panic set in, and I quickly left the studio, shutting the door behind me. The next morning, I decided to confront Emma about what I had found. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, I was met with a cold, blank stare. I hesitated, but then asked her directly about the bones and the strange drawings. Emma's face twisted into a sinister smile. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said calmly. "Those are my private projects. They help me connect with the darker energies of the universe." Her words made my skin crawl, but I tried to keep my composure. "This is too much, Emma," I said, trying to sound firm. "I can't live in a house filled with this darkness. It's affecting me, and I need to feel safe in my own home." Emma's expression changed, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, anger, perhaps, or madness. "If you can't handle my art, maybe you shouldn't be here," she said quietly, before turning and walking away. Determined to understand what was happening, I decided to investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Emma's art than she was letting on. I began searching the house while she was out, looking for any clues that might explain her bizarre behavior. One evening, I stumbled upon a hidden door in the basement. It was small and almost unnoticeable, tucked away behind a stack of old boxes. My curiosity piqued. I carefully moved the boxes and opened the door. What I found inside was like something out of a horror movie. The room was dark, with walls covered in strange symbols and candles scattered around the floor. In the center of the room was a large, ornate table with various objects on it: bones, feathers, and what looked like vials of blood. There were also several old, tattered books with titles written in a language I couldn't understand. My heart pounded as I took in the scene. It was clear that Emma was involved in something far more sinister than just art. This room was a place of dark rituals, and I had no idea what kind of forces she was trying to summon. I knew I had to get out of that house, but I was terrified of what Emma might do if she found out I had discovered her secret. That night, I barely slept, every sound making me jump. I decided to pack my things and leave the next day while Emma was out. The following morning, I began packing my belongings, trying to be as quiet as possible. Just as I was about to leave, I heard the front door open. Emma was back earlier than expected. Panic set in, and I quickly hid my bags in my room, hoping she wouldn't notice. Emma walked past my room, her eyes narrowing as she saw me standing there. "Going somewhere?" she asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. "I just needed some fresh air," I lied, trying to keep my voice steady. She stared at me for a moment before walking away. I knew I had to leave that night, no matter what. That evening, I waited until I was sure Emma was asleep before quietly grabbing my bags and sneaking out of the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way to my car, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting Emma to appear at any moment. I drove away from the house as fast as I could, not stopping until I was miles away. I found a motel and checked in, feeling a wave of relief wash over me as I locked the door behind me. I was safe, but I knew I had to report what I had found. The next day, I went to the police and told them everything. They took my report seriously and promised to investigate. A few days later, I received a call from the police, informing me that they had searched the house and found the ritual room. Emma had been arrested for her involvement in illegal activities and was being investigated further. Leaving that house was a huge relief, but the experience left me scarred. I had trouble trusting people and felt a constant sense of unease. I moved in with a friend who knew about my ordeal and was supportive during my recovery. For months, I had nightmares about Emma and her dark rituals. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the images of her twisted art and sinister smile haunting me. I sought therapy to help me process the trauma and slowly began to rebuild my sense of security. Over time, I managed to move past the incident, but it still haunts me to this day. I learned to be more cautious about who I choose to live with and always trust my instincts. The memory of Emma and her dark art serves as a reminder of how little we sometimes know about the people around us. My name is Claire, and this happened to me a few years ago when I moved to a new city for graduate school. I was excited about starting my new life and needed to find a place to live quickly. I found an affordable room in a shared apartment with another student named Hannah. Hannah seemed friendly and laid back when we first met, and she told me she was studying art history. The apartment was in a nice neighborhood, close to campus, and I felt lucky to have found it. Hannah and I hit it off right away. We spent our first few weeks getting to know each other, sharing meals, and exploring the city together. She seemed like the perfect roommate, respectful, tidy, and easy to talk to. As the semester progressed, I started to notice small, strange things about Hannah. She was often out late at night and would come home looking exhausted. When I asked her about it, she would shrug it off and say she was studying at the library or working on a project. Her explanations seemed plausible, so I didn't think much of it. However, there were other things that didn't add up. Hannah would receive mysterious phone calls and texts at odd hours, and she would always step out of the room to take them. Sometimes she would leave the apartment for days without any explanation. When she returned, she would be evasive about where she had been. One day, I came home to find Hannah's door slightly ajar. I knew it was wrong to invade her privacy, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked inside and was surprised to see her room in complete disarray. There were papers scattered everywhere, strange drawings on the walls, and a locked box on her desk. I quickly backed out, feeling guilty for snooping. Things took a darker turn when I accidentally discovered a hidden door in the hallway. I was cleaning the apartment and noticed a faint outline of a door behind a large painting. It was cleverly concealed, and I wouldn't have noticed it if I hadn't been dusting the walls. My curiosity was piqued, and I decided to investigate further. When Hannah was out one evening, I carefully moved the painting and found a small, locked door. I managed to pick the lock using a bobby pin and open the door to reveal a narrow staircase leading down to a basement. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to descend the stairs. The basement was dimly lit and filled with strange items, old books, odd sculptures, and what looked like ritualistic objects. In the center of the room was a large table covered with more papers and a laptop. As I looked closer, I realized the papers were filled with detailed notes and diagrams about occult practices and secret societies. My heart raced as I tried to process what I was seeing. Why would Hannah have all this hidden away? What was she involved in? I quickly took some pictures with my phone and left the basement, locking the door behind me and replacing the painting. I spent the next few days feeling uneasy, unable to shake the feeling that I had stumbled upon something dangerous. I decided to confront Hannah about what I had found, but I needed to be careful. I didn't want her to know I had been snooping, so I planned to ask her indirectly. One evening, I casually brought up the topic of secret societies and the occult, hoping to gauge her reaction. To my surprise, she became visibly tense and defensive. She told me she didn't believe in that nonsense and quickly changed the subject. Her reaction only confirmed my suspicions. Determined to find out more, I began discreetly observing Hannah's behavior. I noticed she was spending more time in her room, and the mysterious phone calls and late-night outings continued. I also noticed she had a small notebook that she kept with her at all times, never letting it out of her sight. One day, while Hannah was out, I saw an opportunity to search her room more thoroughly. I knew it was a risk, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was very wrong. I carefully entered her room and began searching through her things. I found the lockbox on her desk and, using the same bobby pin trick, managed to open it. Inside, I discovered a collection of old letters, photographs, and documents that detailed Hannah's involvement in a secret society. The letters spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and dark ceremonies. The photographs showed Hannah with a group of people, all dressed in strange robes, performing what looked like occult rituals. As I read through the documents, I realized that Hannah wasn't just a member of this secret society, she was deeply involved in its activities. The letters also revealed that she had been tasked with recruiting new members, and that she had brought people to the apartment for these rituals. I felt sick to my stomach and quickly put everything back in its place. I needed to get out of there, but I also needed to gather more evidence to take to the authorities. I copied some of the documents onto my phone and left the room, my mind racing with fear and confusion. With the evidence I had gathered, I decided to do some research on the secret society mentioned in the letters. I spent hours online, piecing together information about the group and its activities. The more I learned, the more terrified I became. This was a dangerous cult that had been linked to several disappearances and suspected of dark rituals. I knew I had to leave the apartment, but I needed to be careful. I couldn't let Hannah know that I was onto her. I started making plans to move out, contacting friends and looking for a new place to stay. I also gathered all the evidence I had and prepared to go to the police. The night I planned to leave, Hannah came home unexpectedly early. My heart pounded as I quickly hid my packed bags and tried to act normal. She seemed agitated and kept glancing at me suspiciously. I knew I had to leave that night, no matter what. As soon as Hannah went to her room, I grabbed my bags and quietly slipped out of the apartment. I made my way to a friend's house, feeling a sense of relief as I put distance between myself and Hannah. The next morning, I went to the police and told them everything I had discovered. The police took my report seriously and launched an investigation. A few days later, they informed me that they had searched the apartment and found the hidden basement and all the evidence of Hannah's involvement in the secret society. She was arrested and charged with several crimes, including conspiracy and involvement in illegal activities. Leaving that apartment was a huge relief, but the experience left me deeply shaken. I had trouble trusting people and felt a constant sense of unease. I moved in with a close friend who knew about my ordeal and was supportive during my recovery. For months, I had nightmares about Hannah and the secret society. I would wake up in a cold sweat, the images of the dark rituals and the hidden basement haunting me. I sought therapy to help me process the trauma and slowly began to rebuild my sense of security. Over time, I managed to move past the incident, but it still haunts me to this day. I learned to be more cautious about who I choose to live with and always trust my instincts. The memory of Hannah and her secret life serves as a reminder of how little we sometimes know about the people around us. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.